Good evening, councillors, officers and members of the public. Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Place and Environment Scrutiny Committee. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed to the Council's YouTube channel, and I welcome viewers joining us online. Please can I ask members and officers to ensure that mobile phones are either set to silent or switched off for the duration of the meeting. We have got a couple of speakers registered to speak today, so we'll come to them at the appropriate time. I'd like to remind members of the procedure for tonight's agenda. Should members wish to amend, remove or add additional recommendations or requests as part of our debates, then they need to state and propose a recommendation at the appropriate time and seek a seconder to then confirm the recommendation. Members will then debate and vote on the additional or amended recommendation as necessary. I ask all members to be mindful of this when preparing questions and comments to ensure that each item receives appropriate attention and scrutiny within the available time. So we'll now move on to the first agenda item, that's apologies for absence. Do we have any, Callum?
Thank you, Chair. We have one apology from Councillor Fajanovic. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Agenda item 2, minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of December. Are members happy for the, as that's a true record of the meeting and happy for me to sign those off? No questions. We're after a proposer, Councillor Gibbs, and a seconder, Councillor Eglin. Perfect, thank you. And then we just need to see all those in favour, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah, and now that's perfect, thank you. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Do we have any members that have got a declaration of interest for tonight's meeting at all? None recorded, thank you. Agenda item 4 is the Community Safety Partnership Plan 26 to 29. I'd like to start by inviting Lynn Buckingham to address the committee. You've got 3 minutes, Lynn, and go when you're ready.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody, Chair, members. This is a competent community safety plan and it meets statutory requirements. But competence is not the same as confidence and compliance is not the same as impact. The plan clearly identifies the right priorities: serious violence, domestic abuse, women and girls, cohesion and antisocial behaviour. Where it currently falls short is translating those priorities into measurable outcomes that residents can feel and scrutiny can hold to account. We see a heavy reliance on phrases such as increase, improve and expand, but very few baseline targets or timelines. Without these, it becomes difficult to assess whether the partnership is succeeding or simply staying busy. Antisocial behaviour is a good example. The plan rightly recognises ASB as a major concern and one of the 2 priorities championed directly by the CSP board. Yet there are no explicit targets for reducing repeat victims, improving response times or increasing awareness of the community trigger, all of which matter deeply to residents. The plan also acknowledges that people feel less safe, particularly in urban areas. That perception of safety should itself be treated as a core outcome, alongside crime reduction. If residents don't feel safer, we haven't succeeded. I would therefore urge this plan to be strengthened through the annual action plans by introducing clear published outcome measures for each priority, named accountable leads and transparent reporting, particularly for place-based initiatives such as Clear, Hold, Build. Done well, this plan could move from being a solid framework to a genuinely confidence-building tool for our communities. That is the standard that residents should expect. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Welcome to the meeting. Kerry and Chief Inspector, is it Kiernan? Oh, Mary, okay, perfect, thank you. Kerry, I'd like you to introduce the item for us, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll introduce the item and then I'm happy to respond as well to the public speaker. So the purpose of this report is to introduce the North Northamptonshire, sorry, my blip on my laptop, North Northamptonshire Community Safety Partnership Plan for 26 to 29. The Community Safety Partnership is a statutory arrangement which requires relevant organisations to work together to reduce crime and disorder. North Northamptonshire Council chairs the partnership through the Director of Public Health, Communities and Leisure, and it's vice-chaired by the police. The partnership is required to produce a 3-year community safety plan, which is subject to annual review. The partnership plan is not a council plan, it is a statutory the council is a statutory partner of the partnership, but the plan is owned by the Community Safety Partnership, but is being brought forward for formal adoption by the council to make sure that the council is in support of it. Each organisation within the Community Safety Partnership has its own specialist areas of business, and these continue to be conducted as a matter of course. The idea of the partnership plan is about focusing on additional activities that can be best achieved through joint working to ensure that the partnership adds value. The plan contains 5 key overarching aims, some of which are statutory duties for the council and its partners, so we have to include them. So preventing serious harm from violence and protecting and supporting people from domestic abuse are statutory duties, but are obviously included and expanded on in the plan. And then it also includes protecting and supporting women and girls, which is in line with the new National Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, and that our communities are cohesive and stable and our neighbourhoods and towns are safer for everyone, which is the antisocial behaviour priority, which I hope that members would expect to see in a community safety plan. So coming on to the delivery, which is absolutely critical, as has been mentioned already, each overarching priority will be owned by a member of the partnership, and we're currently identifying who those leads would be at the moment. And they will be responsible for developing and implementing action plans to achieve that priority. We've already done quite a lot of work as a partnership to look at baselining data and to look at key performance indicators. So we're not starting now to do that. That work has been done as we've developed the plan, and they will be fed into those action plans for each of the priorities. And that will be about collecting the right data and impact measures so that we can demonstrate progress against the plan. The plan also sets out a set of principles and methods by which the partners of the partnership are committing to work, and this is focusing on integrated place-based delivery through the work of our local area partnerships and place-based partnerships, family hub network, and also all the other networks and interventions that we do to try and prevent issues escalating and intervene early. This ensures that we will work with the voluntary community and social enterprise sector and residents in order to deliver this plan, and that we will join up our services as much as we can. So we will oversee the progress of the plan. The CSP board meets quarterly, but there is a governance structure that sits beneath the board that is being refreshed to fit this plan, to make sure that we have the right task and finish groups or subgroups that really focus on the 5 priorities, and that those action plans are developed and that they are monitored. We as a council are increasing our resources in the community safety team in order to work more closely with the police and other partners in terms of that frontline response and effectiveness in dealing with antisocial behaviour that's reported to the council. But we're also increasing or strengthening our partnership support resource. So we're at the moment in a staff consultation exercise because we're restructuring, so I'm mindful of that. But one of the proposals is to strengthen our community safety partnership support role to make sure that we can track performance against the key performance indicators, that we have an engine room that sits behind the community safety plan so that the right baseline data and progress can be reported to the board through the different subgroups, but equally can be reported to councillors and publicly in a way that is required. We have a commitment to deliver an annual report. We did our first one last year, but we will continue to do that. But that doesn't mean to say that we would wait annually to be able to show progress. So I note, hopefully I've addressed some of the questions that have come up, but I note the request that we consider those plans and the ownership of those plans being published and that the data around tracking progress comes forward at regular intervals. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Excellent, thank you for that, Kerry. So we'll open it up to the floor. Has anyone got any comments or questions? Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. I'm happy to make a start from within the committee, and thank you, Kerry, for that introduction, and thank you, Lynn, for your points as well, which I tend to agree with. I'd read the report, and it really does feel a bit Kafkaesque. All of these strategic boards, these operational groups, these panels, these tasking teams, I found it really difficult to understand, and I'm sure if residents read it, they'd find it quite difficult to understand as well. Now, I don't want to be overly critical in that regard. I can understand this umbrella thinking, and then everything sort of filters down from it. But I am just wondering, and I felt this with some of the other reports on our agenda this evening and at past meetings, there must at least be a better way of trying to reflect how these plans are going to result in key performance indicators that will be measurable in due course in terms of pledges that will be delivered. Whether that's some means of visualising it for the benefit of the readers, I think there must be a better way of perhaps trying to understand how this is all going to work. That was my first thought. Anyway, touching on some aspects of the plan itself, it reminded me of the discussions that we had at this Scrutiny Committee meeting on the antisocial behaviour policy on the 2nd of September, which is touched on, I think, in particular on priority 5 in the plan. And at that meeting on the 2nd of September, when we were discussing that policy, it was agreed that officers would come forward with data on antisocial behaviour enforcement and PSPOs. And I mentioned at that meeting one specifically in Wellingborough, where we would really have welcomed data. And it took me back to the recommendation, or at least the agreement at that meeting, where we requested officers that additional information and data be provided to members of this committee in relation to antisocial behaviour enforcement. And I would have thought this was the perfect opportunity for that data to be presented. And yet, beyond probably a little bit on page 15 and the forward of the report, that data isn't there. So I would request again, can we have that data? Because this was the opportunity to see it. We also concluded at that meeting that it would be really helpful if the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner could be asked to attend a future meeting. So I guess in that regard, it's really welcome to see Chief Inspector Miriam here this evening. So welcome. I did pick up last week, and I don't know if you can answer this, Chief Inspector, that the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner has launched a dedicated team to strengthen the response to antisocial behaviour in Northamptonshire. I couldn't see that that was mentioned in the context of antisocial behaviour, though, in this plan. And that then led me to think of this golden thread that we're continuously talking about that comes down from the corporate plan, that was mentioned in the corporate peer challenge review, that is supposed to filter down into each of these plans. But I haven't seen it there, for example, in the context of antisocial behaviour, and also in the context of working with partners, in that context, the police, and how that fits into this plan. So I'd be really interested in your thoughts on that. Kerry, you mentioned... Can we
just jump in and give them a chance to respond at this stage? Otherwise, it's building up far too much.
And there's a lot to build up on, you're right, Chair.
We'll come back.
That's fine.
Can we respond to any of that, if we can, please?
If I'll start, and then I'll hand over to Miriam. So absolutely, there is a commitment that when we report on the progress, then we need to make sure that that's done in the most simple to understand way as possible. So we're talking about having data dashboards and make them as visual as possible, because I do understand that we need to make sure that they are digestible for a wide audience. In terms of antisocial behaviour, the antisocial behaviour policy, which is a council policy, so it's a little bit different to the community safety plan, which is a partnership document. We're doing some work because we recognise as a series of services within the council who deal with antisocial behaviour, because it's not just the community safety partnership or community safety team that deals with antisocial behaviour, that at the moment all the data is sort of collected in those services are not pulled together to provide one picture of what antisocial behaviour is being reported to the council and what actions we're taking, whether that be early intervention or enforcement. So collectively we're doing a piece of work with our corporate performance service to look at how we can bring that data forward. So I apologise that that's taking longer than we would have thought, but there are quite a number of services across the council where antisocial behaviour is reported, and if we just came from a community safety perspective, you'd only get a snapshot of the picture. So I think it's right that we wait till we get the full picture of information and bring that forward. I'll let Miriam respond about the ASB team. It's not referenced here because it is a bit hot off the press, but I believe it's a change to a team that already exists as opposed to something brand new. But I'll let Miriam come in on that.
So yes, it is a change to a team that already exists. They're being repurposed to look at ASB. The Commissioner has recognised that the feelings of ASB are increasing and that she needs to put some resources in towards that. So she's rebadging one of her teams as an ASB team to help support the neighbourhood teams, and that's going to get launched in Rushden. It's not yet ready for launch. The team are still being trained up, but it will be additional resources there to assist the neighbourhood policing teams with the ASB problems that there are in county.
Thank you. Did you want to come back, David?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Kerry and Chief Inspector. I guess 2 follow-up questions, and I'll leave my other questions for later on in the discussions so that other members of the committee can come in. In relation to the dedicated team that the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner has set up to address antisocial behaviour, can I ask why is it just being piloted in Rushden? What's the decision for choosing Rushden as a pilot area? And in relation to the data that still needs to come to us, Kerry, in relation to antisocial behaviour, I understand that there may be different teams working on it and that takes a bit of time. I fully understand that. We do have a little bit of data in the report itself, and that mentions 6,857 incidents across Northamptonshire. Well, actually, no, sorry, it doesn't say that. Recorded by Northamptonshire Police in 24-25. I guess if you're recording data in relation to the council's enforcement officers in respect of antisocial behaviour, the parameters of that need to be consistent with what the police are recording as well in terms of what they also term to be antisocial behaviour.
So I'll let Miriam come back on the ASB Rushden the team, the Rushden pilot. So in terms of the data that's recorded, the ASB that's recorded by the council is often different to the ASB recorded by the police because we have different responsibilities. So antisocial behaviour recorded by the police will obviously be everything that's reported to the police, but the focus by the police is on those antisocial behaviour incidents that are crimes. If an antisocial behaviour incident is reported to the council that isn't a crime, we would encourage the resident to report it to the police because we're not equipped to take those crime reports. If it's not a crime, then we would record it and seek to deal with it. And that's probably similar across the other services within the council. So it isn't like for like recording, but what we do need to do, absolutely, is have the collective picture of what that means around antisocial behaviour in Northamptonshire. Yes, absolutely.
In relation to why Rushden, I'll be honest, I don't know why the Commissioner has decided Rushden will be the pilot area. If I had to guess, it would be because the target group that's been looked at, it's for early intervention. So we know that youth ASB can be a particular issue for the residents in Rushden. There's underreporting that may or may not be going on there, and it's for us to then refer in potential families that are at risk to that early intervention team set up by the PCC.
Yeah, David.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a very quick question. What you mentioned that the team that's now been set up and trained is an existing team that's kind of being retrained and refocused. What was that team and what were they doing? And is there a detrimental effect in terms of reorganising what they are now doing?
No, it's just a slightly different point of work that they're taking from, so where we've been able to flex resources to move them across to Pol Ed and other bits like that, repurposing PCSOs inside to do some more engagement work with schools. We've got that capacity there to take it rather than looking at just purely knife crime violence to look at total ASB. So it's an enhancement rather than a complete removal.
Okay, anyone else? Yeah. Okay, Helen?
Thank you, Kerry. Yeah, comprehensive report as usual. I know. So, just coming back on your point, excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold. The team that you're talking about, obviously, do we know how many are in the team and what sort of impact do you think those individuals are going to have? Because if they're already dealing with other issues, how are they going to then start targeting other forms of antisocial behaviour? How many are there and what impact do you think they're going to have? That would be probably one question. I've got a couple. Thank you.
I don't have the exact numbers on the team. I can get that and bring that back to you, and I can see if the OPFCC's office have anything in terms of measurable KPIs that they have set for that team, and I can get that fed back to this group.
Okay, that'd be useful. Thank you very much. So what measurable progress has been achieved since the last update, and how is it being evaluated? Kerry.
In relation to
the previous, so what measurable progress has been achieved since the last plan update? Sorry.
So we did an annual report early this year, which looked at the activity against the plan that's just obviously expired. I think we recognised that the previous plan wasn't as focused on key performance indicators and outcomes. It was more outputs focused, which is why this plan we're giving a commitment. We've done lots more work this time. So as I say, that we're not starting from scratch from KPIs. That work has already been done. I appreciate it's not in the plan for public consumption at this stage, because we want to get those action plans developed and then set the KPIs and the baseline data against those. So we will be able to measure more fully moving forward than we have done in the past. That doesn't mean to say we didn't deliver against elements of the previous plan, but we recognise we weren't doing it in a way that was as easy to demonstrate, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I've got another question, unless there's some. I didn't. Sorry. Thank you. So how are available resources and external grants being targeted to deliver the greatest local impact?
Yes, so there's quite a lot of, as well as the sort of routine funding that comes into the different partners to deliver against community safety agendas. We look for, and we also take advantage of, quite a lot of external funding that comes through, for example, the Home Office or through the Ministry of Justice, and a lot of the additional, or a lot of the statutory duties that we have do have funding streams attached to them. So the serious violence duty, which came in a couple of years ago, and members may remember, or if you weren't aware, there is a county-wide serious violence strategy, and there is funding that comes through the Police Crime Commissioner's Office to help that strategy be delivered. That funding has been confirmed again into the next financial year. That funding, because the priority for the serious violence strategy is around children and young people particularly, so a considerable amount of that funding goes into local delivery, often through the voluntary community sector, about targeted diversionary activity for young people to divert them away from criminal exploitation and other criminal behaviour and violent crime, whether they're an offender or a victim. And then equally we get a significant amount of funding through MHCLG for our domestic abuse services, particularly around the provision of safe accommodation or refuge. So we're in the process of commissioning contracts to continue to deliver that. But we're always looking for opportunities. The Home Office committed some funding over the last couple of years around the sort of safer streets or town Safer Summer, I think it was called last year, wasn't it? Which was about being able to bring in some additional visible resource, both from a police perspective and a council perspective in town centres. I'm not aware that funding is continuing into the next financial year, but wherever and whenever the opportunities are, we seek to bring in that funding and use it for local people. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Kerry and Miriam. I'll ask one of the first questions on here, and then I have a few questions about the priorities, if that's okay. So how did the CSP weigh different issues when selecting the 5 priorities? And then I have a couple of questions about knife crime, if that's okay.
So as I've said, some of them are statutory duties, so we can't ignore those statutory duties. So domestic abuse, serious violence I've mentioned, and although it's not one of our 5, there are other duties that we have as a CSP that we keep an eye on and that we resource and that we deliver. So prevention of extremism is another statutory duty, for example. And the other ones were chosen based on data and evidence primarily from across the partnership, in particular crime data, as you would expect, but it's also from the insight and intelligence provided through a whole range of sources, and not in the least through resident engagement. So the police do a lot of engagement on the ground to set local priorities on an ongoing basis. There was quite a significant resident engagement exercise undertaken by the Police Crime Commissioner's Office in the development of the Safe and Sound Plan, and then obviously NNC did its first resident survey last year where community safety came sort of top of residents' priorities in terms of antisocial behaviour. So it's a mixture of things, but it is based on evidence and data and intelligence.
Thanks, Kerry. So the first priority is preventing serious harm from violence, knife crime and exploitation. In the report, page 28, it mentions that in the year 31st March 25, they recorded 497 knife-enabled crimes. What's the definition of a knife-enabled crime? Is it where someone has produced a knife or somebody's carried a knife, or is it a combination of both?
So for knife-enabled crime, we've got Home Office statistics that we report back on. Someone could have threatened with a knife, they could have produced a knife, or they could have been found with a knife. So if an officer does a stop and search, finds a person in possession of a knife, that counts towards our possession of weapons offences and counts towards knife-enabled.
Okay, so that leads to my next question, which was going to be, are we carrying out stop and search?
Yes, we are. I can find the exact figures out for you across the north, and I can find out how many of them are specifically for weapons or where we have found a weapon. I can't provide that data right now, but I can provide that after to the committee if they would like.
If you could, that would be much appreciated. Do you mind if I ask another one, Chair? Thank you. Another one was, I welcome the fact that one of the first priorities is preventing knife crime. But one of the realities with knife crime is that young people, particularly teenagers, won't carry them to commit crime. They'll carry them as a form of self-defense. How is that taken into account in the report, or is it all lumped together as one thing?
In terms of judicial outcomes that we would give, or in what way? Because possession of the knife is illegal regardless of whether you're carrying it for self-defense or not.
Yeah, I understand that. So let me rephrase the question. I think you've answered the question. You're basically saying they're lumped together as one thing. A young, I don't know, 16-year-old kid, he's caught carrying a knife. He's represented in these statistics as well.
Yes.
Okay. And does this plan, so some of the actions to achieve the outcomes, it doesn't seem like there's anything in there which would prevent that type of scenario, and I think those are the most tragic type of scenarios where someone's carrying a knife for self-defense and they're not related to, and they're not involved in organised crime or gang activity.
So we have engagement with the secondary schools and some of the primary schools around PolEd, which talks about the dangers of knife crime. We work closely with NN Off the Streets about removing knives from the localities. You'll find that there's been knife bins raised up as part of our ops sector that we do twice a year. We'll do inputs into the schools, get fearless campaigns out there to try and dissuade people, give them statistics that you're more likely to be stabbed with your own knife, even if you're carrying it for your protection. So we do a huge amount with education to try and remove that temptation for people to carry it. Where we believe that someone is a victim of exploitation, we'll do a mandatory NRM for that child to try and get them help, and we will always take into account a modern slavery defence for any child caught either with drugs or where they raise that they're carrying a knife because they need protection because of drug debt.
Thank you. Just one more, Chair. And those preventative programs to prevent teenagers carrying knives, how successful have they been so far?
It depends. It's very difficult to measure what you've prevented. So we can provide you statistics about knife crime over the years, but it's not the same groups, not the same people. Without having all the data of every person that we've ever given an intervention to and then looking at versus the crimes, it's going to be very difficult for us to say. We can say that the increase of the knife bins and the use of the knife bins, we track that. We track how many knives are done it that way. That's a nice volumetric figure for us. But in terms of quantifying what we've prevented, it's not as straightforward.
Just to say that the programmes that are funded through the serious violence strategy, which are often, community organisations that are working with young people, they will obviously, as part of their funding, be required to report how many young people they've engaged and what the outcomes are for those particular young people. Now, I don't have that information to hand, but certainly that information exists because obviously those grants that are given to those organisations, there is a mechanism for them to report back. So if the committees wants to have a little bit more information about the serious violence work that the duty and the strategy is funding, then we can obviously provide that.
Yeah, if you could, that would be fantastic. Thank you, Chair.
We'll come to Matt, please.
Just a couple from me. The plan's reviewed once a year. Things like antisocial behaviour, serious violence or emerging crimes tend to change quickly. So annually, I would suggest is maybe a little bit late if you've got Earthling Borough has issues with some, let's call them young people, riding around on these electric bikes with balaclavas on. I get people say to me when they're zipping through the lakes and meadows, there's no point calling the police because A, they won't come, and B, they're not wearing a crash helmet, so they won't go after them. But for those residents, those are an issue. I know they're not in your top 5 and they're not serious violent crimes, but if you do get issues there where it picks up, do you not think annually is a little bit too slow?
So if I can come in on that, yes, so absolutely, we have to be flexible, adaptable and live to emerging issues because it doesn't stand still. So the plan is our overarching framework, as has been mentioned, the key things that we want to work on strategically. But within the Community Safety Partnership, we have a part of the governance is that a group that has traditionally been called Community One, but we're shifting it a little bit into an operational delivery group. But part of the role of that group is that any partner can bring those emerging issues, particularly if they want a partnership response. So if one organisation can deal with it singularly, then they get on with that in their business as usual. But where it's an ongoing tricky issue that's causing lots of concern for communities and it would be more beneficial to have a partnership response, then there is a mechanism for anybody to raise and bring those emerging issues, and then there is a partnership problem-solving approach to those. So that's one of those.
So who decides if a trigger is worthwhile or not then?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Who decides whether it's worth triggering a review instead of annually? Who could say, well, we're 3 months in and this is happening over here? Who decides whether you'll come together and change it?
So it would come, through the partnership, the Community Safety Partnership Board, through the reporting that will go in against the different priorities and the action plans, but also through the reports of emerging issues. So if there is an emerging issue that the Operational Delivery Board hasn't been able to solve, or it needs escalating to the partnership to say, actually, this is something where we need to divert our attention, it's not actually in the plan, then we would have that debate and discussion. And the Community Safety Partnership Board meets quarterly, and I don't think we've quite decided yet how often the operational group will meet, but it will be more frequently than that. So there is a mechanism to deal with emerging issues. And I personally think, I think Miriam thinks the same, that whilst those 5 priorities, are clear, they also give us quite a lot of scope. Antisocial behaviour means lots of things to lots of different people. And so actually antisocial use of off-road motorbike scooters, that is absolutely antisocial behaviour. So it fits within the plan anyway, but if there was an issue that didn't, we would still be able to deal with it.
I think it's just raising the bar and encouraging people to report it, because there is a lot of mindset that what is the point?
I'm sure Miriam would agree that, and I know people can be frustrated about, thinking that what's the point because we're not going to get a response. But it's what is reported to the police and or the council and other agencies that determines the level of resource that is allocated to issues. And so we would always collectively encourage people to report. It doesn't mean to say they're going to get an immediate response, because that that is done on threat, risk and harm and threat to life. But the intelligence and the information about what is going on in communities is absolutely vital. Is that right, Miriam?
Yes, we would absolutely encourage people. There are things that we can do at a local level that don't require partnership bits and pieces. So around the ASB and Earthingborough in particular, I know that there's some issues with people riding off-road motorcycles down onto the flats. We're looking at having some gating put in there to have that closed off. The difficulty we have is when people don't report because they don't see an immediate action, and we get a lot of people on Facebook expressing concerns. They'll put pictures up of people that they believe it is, but they don't understand the evidential requirements that we have to take that person to justice. But it all adds to our intel picture and helps us move our resources appropriately. For Earthingborough, there's 2 PCs and 1 PCSO for the entire area of Earthingborough. If I'm not getting reports through that ASB is happening in this particular area, they'll go where the reports are. And it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. So we do need the reports to come in so that we can work through that intelligence. And I'm not saying it's going to be a quick fix, because these things never are. There's a huge evidential burden we have to get through. But we are looking at and exploring other options.
Helen, please.
Thank you. Thank you, yes. Sorry, just picking up on something you just said there, a couple of things actually. You mentioned the resources that you had that covered Earthingborough. Do they solely cover Earthingborough, or do they have to cover other areas as well? Because I know in the past they've had to cover a greater area, so for instance Raunds and Thrapston. So actually when you talk about resources saying that they're covering Earthingborough, they're not covering Earthingborough because they've got to do a greater area as well. So obviously limited resources is an issue, isn't it, for everybody when we're talking about reporting, and then not having the resources to go out there and deal with the issues. That's probably something that needs to be looked at as well, and obviously that will come from a higher level. I appreciate that, but when we're talking about how much resources we have in an area, we should really be a bit more clear as to really how much resources we have in those areas, I would suggest.
Apologies, yes, on our systems it's combined Earthingborough and Raunds. I know it's dealt with separately, but on our systems it's a combined Earthingborough and Raunds, and there's 2 PCs for that, and that data is all fully available on the Northants Police website. You can put your area in and it'll tell you the PCs for that specific area. For the entirety of Wellingborough and East Northants, there are 27 officers to cover everything the whole way from Wellingborough town the whole way up to Oundle, solely on the neighbourhood policing team. There's response officers on top of that, but ASB, etc., would be dealt with by the local neighbourhood officers.
Okay, thank you. I think that makes it a bit clearer then. Can I carry on? Sorry, I was just picking up on that point. Sorry, David. You mentioned earlier about modern slavery, and I think obviously that is sort of starting to become a bit more prevalent now. There's a lot more in the press and everything about modern slavery. And this is something that, I mean, in my line of work, should I say, it's something that we train on it. So just to get that out there. But this is the point. There needs to be a lot more education around modern slavery, and a lot of larger businesses aren't really aware of what goes on with the use of gang leaders and things like that. And when you're talking about bigger factories and foundries and things like that, when they're looking for temporary staff all the time and they use agencies to bring members in, you can get an awful lot of this modern slavery going on. I'm sure you're well aware of that. And I think there does need to be, as I said, a lot more education in schools, in businesses and all around. And what can this plan, and the Community Safety Partnership do to support that role in educating all of these local businesses and things like that, not only in all of the other things that you're talking about, but specifically modern slavery as well? Thank you.
I think it's a good point, well made. I don't think the plan It doesn't mean to say that modern slavery isn't important for the partnership, but obviously it's not, it's part of our sort of exploitation piece and priority. But I think the comment about how we can support businesses to recognise and understand the risks associated with that, that's something that we haven't recently discussed, so I will take that away and raise that, and we'll have a look at that and see what's being done already, because I'm sure there is stuff being done, but what else could be done?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
David, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, two points really. I mean, priority 4 and 5, I have to say, are just really bit wishy-washy. I mean, they. Oh, now I've lost it. Where's it gone? So, sorry, I beg your pardon, Chair. It's now gone. Hang on.
My paper version.
Yeah, have you got the priorities?
Here we are.
Yeah, so look, our communities are cohesive and stable. Priority 5, our neighbourhoods and towns are safer for everyone. Obviously, it could mention villages as well, but you know, as with all these reports, they often are just sometimes words, and that for anyone reading that without, I appreciate the context. They might just think it's words. But I was going to say, unfortunately, just going back to motorbikes, because it probably does fall into priority 5. We have a problem with motorbikes in our ward. And last week, ironically, a resident rang me to tell me that again, young people on motorbikes with no helmet razzing around the town happened to hit a car. And the resident in question witnessed this and wanted to know if I would report it to the police, because they were concerned about reporting it to the police because of the suspected individuals on the motorbikes. So you mentioned about, you know, the police want to have the report, so we've got data to back it up. I guess my point, Chair, is that sometimes I don't think the police need data to know what the problems are, and I think we all probably can point to hotspots of issues that perhaps are just isolated in certain areas. So sadly, we did have, about 2 years ago, an individual on one of these motorbikes that was stolen, sadly had a very, very bad accident in my ward. Yeah, and it doesn't feel like, and I've had multiple conversations with various people within the police, it doesn't feel like that there's lots of reasons why we can't tackle it, but there doesn't feel like there's a proactive approach to saying we're going to smash this situation and we're going to put resources into it. And as I say, priority 5 for me, our neighbourhoods and towns are safer for everyone. So my example last week, where it isn't safe when kids are running around on motorbikes and smashing into cars and riding away, and there is literally no potential comeback on that individual. I just think sometimes that the police need to perhaps recognise, even when the data might be slightly lacking, how we can deliberately go and get that problem. Thank you.
With the very limited resources we have to be transparent about why we're doing what we're doing. So them officers on neighbourhoods, when they set up an operation to tackle ASB motorcycles, they haven't got the skill set because you're required to be pursuit trained. So we then have to take officers away from their core duties that would be pursuit trained to tackle with that. When you look at it, you've got a set number of officers that can do that skill set and that are trained to that standard. How would we as an organisation justify putting them in a ward where there are no reports versus a ward where there are reports? There would rightly be questions asked. We haven't got an infinite amount of people that are trained. Taking people off a motorbike or a moped is high risk, particularly if they're not wearing a helmet. You then have to justify, and that driver of the police vehicle has to justify potentially causing serious injury or death to that person, because the tactical contact that you need to make to take someone off that has that as a consequence. So for an officer and from a forces justification point of view, we are not going to be able to get the resources, because there are so few of them, to go to areas where we haven't got the reports. And where we do have them, it then becomes a decision for the officer that's trained as to whether the risk of what's happening is worth us potentially hitting someone and them losing their life. Because that officer will then be under investigation for years and potentially face prison. It makes it even more difficult when you have reports that that person on a bike is a child, because that's often how it is. We are looking at non-contact opportunities using things such as DNA sprays. For us to be able to spray them, we're putting funding requests in to be able to spray the people so it's non-contact. So we can then follow up the intelligence and use UV lights to try and track that person down to that particular crime. But the risk to knocking someone off of two wheels is exceptionally high, and the risk is still there even if we look to sting the vehicle, where you put this spike strip out. It can't be something that's done in isolation, so you can't just have one officer. You require to have a number plotted up all across in case that person drives off in a different way. If they go off-road, our vehicles can't go off-road. So there are loads of multifaceted things around there. So when I say we need the reports to justify the resourcing that we need to put into it. Because it's not just as simple as it's just the local officers that can do it, because they are not pursuit trained to that level.
But these are young people who do wheelies up the street, could take out a pram and a buggy. Now, I know which I'd rather that person hit, a police car or a pram and a buggy. And that's what people will see. They ride these bikes erratically and dangerously, and we're worried about them when they could hurt anyone.
And it's not that we are not worried about it, but we have to find a way that we can tackle it proportionately. Sending officers out to knock every child off a bike, we'd be having different conversations if there were 6 dead children.
The young adults, not children.
They're classed as children because they're under 18. We have to treat them as children according to the law. They require an appropriate adult in custody the whole way up until they turn 18. So while people's views that they are young adults, in law they're classed as children, and we have to treat them that way. And I do think we'd be having different conversations if we had knocked a child off and they had died. There would be rightly criticism as to why we undertook that tactic for a what-if scenario. That doesn't mean we're not doing anything. We are looking, as I said, at those 2 different projects that can be used where we can deploy officers tactically based on the reports and the times to spray offenders, so it doesn't require, it's not high risk for us. So we are not required to engage with that person and try and knock them off the bike, but it provides us with an evidential package then that we can tie back that use of that spray to that incident at that time and then process it from there. Because they're children, what the courts do after that, we don't know, because they usually look for out-of-court disposals for children at their first offences.
If you've got enough evidence in regards to the bikes, are you able to confiscate the bikes even if you can't necessarily pinpoint the specifics of the rider?
Yes, and we do. There have been occasions where officers have tried to engage with someone, they've taken off on the bike, it's been then dumped, and we'll just seize that as used in crime. Okay, so
in my example, the local police officers know exactly where these bikes are and who the kids are. I mean, I don't, but I know where they are because they come from certain locations. I don't understand why, well, I do understand actually, why the police do not just go and seize the vehicles, even if they can't pinpoint the individual that was on the bike. You know, if there's evidence of video door cameras, for example, that identify these bikes, because basically, in my situation, they go down a particular route because they're slightly out of town, they come into the town and they cause a nuisance in a particular area because they're just riding around on the bikes. The public, the police, know where these bikes are coming from. They know the kids on the bikes. I don't understand why the police don't go and seize the bikes, even if, as I say, they can't tell on a particular day which of the kids was on the bike. Why don't they just go and seize the bikes?
We would have to know it was that bike.
But if you've got evidence, video evidence...
Most of them don't have registration numbers on them. if they don't have a registration number, when we're seizing it as used in crime, how can we say for certainty that that bike we have seized is the same bike on that CCTV? And that's the difficulty we come. So the removal of the registration numbers causes us huge issues. When our traffic officers see them without the registration numbers, if they light them up to try and stop them and they make off, we're struggling here within the limits of what we are able to do. And I know a lot of people will say, well, why don't you plot up outside these kids' houses? That's surveillance. It requires a RIPA authority. It's not as simple as we can just sit there because we know which address it is and we know which kids are going to come out and we know it's going to be at 5 p.m. every Friday, so why don't we just stick an officer in a car there and nab them when they go out? That's surveillance. That requires RIPA authority, which means we'd be doing surveillance on a child. It'll never get approved.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. We're going to come one more, David, then we're going to look at closing this one off. We've been on this well. Can I just make sure that we are focusing on, please, on the actual reports themselves rather than specific incidents, because that's what we're here for. Miriam's reported back on quite a lot of information now, which I think has been really, really useful. It's absolutely key that we as councillors and personally as councillors and members of the public, and that we encourage other members of the public to put in reports. There are various options available through Crime Stoppers as well, if they want to be doing it anonymously. But the data must be captured by the police. I've been going on about this for many, many years. It's the only way that you're going to increase potentially police numbers, PCSOs within certain areas using that data. So I'll push and encourage that. We'll come to David and
Thank you, Chair. And I'm glad before the end of this discussion that gives us an opportunity to talk about priorities 2 and 3, and particularly protecting and supporting women and girls. I have no qualms about saying that, in my opinion, violence against women and girls is actually getting to the stage of a national crisis, if I'm honest. It's an absolute disgrace in our society when you look at the figures in relation to violence against women and girls. In relation to the data for Northamptonshire, and looking at priority 3, 6,243 such offences, I'm really concerned, but I'm absolutely not surprised that 20% of those cases were repeat victims. I didn't do this off the top of my head, but my calculator told me that's 1,248 cases that were preventable to some degree or another. You've mentioned school and educational programs in relation to knife crime, so I'd be really interested to know what programs you're doing with schools in terms of preventing violence against women and girls. And I'm particularly interested to understand what you're doing to counter gender inequality and misogyny, especially online, and especially gender inequality and misogyny messaging directed at boys and young boys and teenage boys, and what work you're doing to identify that messaging and to partner with schools, but also what are the schools themselves doing to identify that messaging and how that results in behavioural patterns that can be identified and then can be identified for the purposes of preventing violence against women and girls. Thank you.
So, yeah, there was a lot there in what you'd said, but absolutely, this is why violence against women and girls is a priority in this plan. Hasn't been in previous community safety plans, and it obviously is a priority nationally as well. There is work through the Pol Ed programme, which is the curriculum intervention programme. That is run nationally and has obviously been delivered in North Hampshire. I think we've got well over 80% of schools in the county that are signed up to it. And so the whole sort of education programme around violence against women and girls, including domestic abuse, misogyny, is part of that programme. But the reason why it's in the plan is that we recognise that more can be done. And I think we've talked a lot already about what sort of programmes can be delivered that are very tailored to boys and young men, because that's where the messaging needs to be. And there was a conference held late last year through the Police Crime Commissioner's Office around this subject, and there is some really good national best practice around programmes that can work at an educational level with boys and young men. I don't think we're there yet. I think there's more that we can do, but that's why it's a priority in this plan, and we will be working up some of the activities that we want to do. In the figure around repeat victimisation, because whilst we have a priority for domestic abuse and a priority for violence against women and girls, which is right, because not all domestic abuse is committed against females, we do know that the prevalence of domestic abuse is against females, and a lot of that repeat victimised figure will be to do with domestic abuse. It has long been a priority for the Community Safety Partnership to reduce repeat victimisation, and a lot of work goes on around safety planning and support for victims of domestic abuse, at all levels of intervention, high risk and otherwise, whether that means removing them from their home or whether it means supporting them to remain in their home. What we need to do more of, and that's why it's in the plan, is about developing the work that we do with the perpetrators as well of violence against women and girls and domestic abuse in particular. There is a new national programme, and some funding is coming down to support that. I think the work with perpetrators in over my sort of 30-odd year career in domestic abuse has often been there's been good practice, but it's been quite isolated up and down the country, and I think there's a real drive now to say, well, that's why the programme's called Drive, but it is about trying to roll out good practice and dealing with perpetrators, because we know that it isn't, we shouldn't always focus on the vulnerability of the victim, we should focus on the people that are actually committing the crime. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Leon and then we'll bring this to a close. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll ask as few questions as I can if you want to bring it to a close. Firstly, priority number 2, sticking with this, protecting and supporting people from domestic abuse, sexual violence and exploitation. Just looking at the outcomes and the priority actions, there's nothing in there that seems to be preventative. It's all reactive after it's happened. Is there anything else around this report to prevent the figures in here?
So, we've talked about the sort of healthy relationship training or education for particularly for children and young people. That's in there, and that is critical, and we need to do more of that through expanding the POLED programme. I think we're constantly doing training and education around domestic abuse awareness across professions, particularly within the public sector and community safety partners, but there's more that can be done, because the more people are aware and are talking about domestic abuse, the more opportunities there are to spot the signs, because we know that a victim of domestic abuse, it can take up to 8 incidents before they'll ask for help. So a lot of this is going on hidden in our communities, and so we all have a responsibility to be able to spot the signs. So that's part of the issue about campaigns and awareness raising. We do a lot of that already, but there's always more that can be done. I think for me, the gap around early intervention around domestic abuse, and it is in one of the actions that are listed in the plan, is that we have really good services for people who are risk assessed after an incident of being a medium or high risk victim of domestic abuse. There is a national screening tool that is used to do that. And there is lots of wraparound support and mechanisms provided for those victims. Where it's a lower level incident, so it's a non-crime incident of domestic abuse or a standard risk, so those incidents are still happening, whether or not they're reported to the police. I think there is a gap. We're not able to do at the moment as much wraparound support for those victims, again, to safeguard them, but also to prevent the repeat and prevent it happening again. And so that's why it's in the plan to look at, there is best practice nationally around that, and it's what can we do to be able to intervene earlier. So there's one thing about education and awareness raising for everybody, and then there's how do we get to and support those people that are experience abuse of some description, but it may not be as serious to warrant the current response that we provide to more serious crime. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. I recognise it's a very difficult thing to truly put in a measure to prevent. It has to be reactive. I'd just love to see something in there that's proactive and preventative in the report. Can I ask one more? What is a global ethnic majority, and which communities are those referring to?
Yeah, we've had lots of debate about the right terminology, because the terminology keeps shifting, but it's our racially minoritized communities. But that is, talking to those communities, we're being told that is the terminology we should be using.
So
you might
it's a
disagree
new
with
term
that.
for me. New term for me. Which community specifically? What does it say in here? You're getting an increased number from?
In terms of, are we talking about the domestic abuse?
In terms of priority 2, it says there's an increased number of victims from global ethnic majority communities. Because that's an overarching term. So which communities within that
I'd
umbrella
have
term?
to check the actual data to say whether there's any specific community that relates to. We do know that there's underreporting from our more minority communities around domestic abuse, and we're doing a particular piece of work in Wellingborough at the moment to increase confidence in reporting. There's some cultural barriers often to that, in a way, we're expecting that we want them to be more reporting from those communities, because we know it's underreported at the moment. But I'd have to double check in terms of the figures where the increases has actually fell, but we can do that.
Thanks, Kerry.
Okay, thank you. No, being wary of, we've still got 2 more reports to come tonight. I'm going to bring this one to a close then. So thanks everyone for feedbacks and comments. We have, during this debate, there have been several requests and indications for the presentation of information, stats, data in relation to the subjects covered within the report. Therefore, with the committee's permission, I would like to seek a proposer and a seconder for the recommendation. The Place Environment Scrutiny Committee requests that further information, data and statistics be provided and presented to members by officers and external organisations in relation to matters discussed and stated during deliberation, including, but not limited to, ASB enforcement, knife crime, PFCC pilot schemes and priorities involved within the Community Safety Partnership Plan. So if anyone's happy with that, Councillor Eglin will propose it and Councillor Leon Gibbs second it. So if we can take a vote on if everyone's in favour. So anyone who's in favour of this, can you show your hands? And that's unanimous. Unanimous? Unanimous. Okay, thanks. So on that, we bring that item to a close. Thank you very much for your time, Miriam. Really, it is appreciated. If you wanted to stay, feel free to do so. But equally, if you want to leave at this point, again, thank you very much for your time. So we'll come on to agenda item 5, the Future Leisure Management Options Phase 1. We've not got our public speaker here today, so I'll move straight on to Carrie again to introduce the item, please.
Thank you, Chair. I will try and be succinct, but I think members will probably recognise this is quite a complex area, and therefore it's a lengthy report, so I do apologise for that. So the report sets out work undertaken so far to inform a future decision about how the Council's active communities and leisure services will be delivered. So we're planning to bring a report in 2 phases, given the complexity of this programme. So there's one that's before you tonight, and obviously is destined to go to executive shortly, and then we're aiming to bring a second phase report in May or June of 2026. So this has come about because the Council inherited a mixed model of management of its leisure facilities from the previous authorities. Corby operates in-house facilities, and then the other facilities are contracted to external leisure operators. These contracts have different end dates, but they all come to an end between March 2027 and March 2028. So this affords us an opportunity to look at what the vision is for active community services and leisure facilities moving forward, and what's the best way to deliver that vision. We have an active community strategy and framework that was adopted in 2024, and that sets out our strategic vision for and outcomes for active lifestyles for people who live, work and visit North Northamptonshire. As part of that whole piece of work around developing our strategic framework for active communities, which included an active community strategy, the playing pitch strategy and the leisure facility strategy, at the same time, using external funding, we procured an industry expert to help us with all of that work, but also to look at an options appraisal for the future management of leisure. That report is what has informed the work to date. When we talk about leisure services, we're not just talking about what happens traditionally in leisure facilities, but much more broader physical activity and wellbeing programmes. The report sets out the methodology of the options appraisal, looking at national and local data, and also a performance review on one financial year of the different facilities. I think it's important to note that because we have a mixed model, we're not really comparing apples with apples, and what we deliver through our in-house services is quite different to what the contracts, because they are older, some of them are over 8 years old, what those contracts ask the operators to deliver. So the different management models were looked into and were evaluated against a set of criteria, including strategic outcomes, quality, customer satisfaction, how much control and influence the council wishes to have, and obviously risk and financial implications. I think it's important to note at this point that we haven't completed the work. The assessment that took place was really informative, but there's a lot to think about moving forward. There are we know that there's been changes to energy benchmarking, so the way leisure contracts are set up now is quite different to the way they were set up when the current contracts were tendered several years ago, and a lot of the risks that perhaps previously were passed over to operators now are retained by the council, particularly in relation to energy costs. VAT rules have changed, and then we've also got the impending Employment Rights Bill to be considered, because traditionally our operators will pay their staff considerably less than council staff are paid, but that gap will narrow as a result of the Employment Rights Bill. And then also we need to consider in the visioning that we're doing what sort of service the council wants. Does it want a traditional leisure service where we open and close leisure centres and people come and use the facilities, or do we want to focus on active health and well-being, active for health programmes that will actually be preventative and reduce cost on other costly services such as adult social care? So a number of models were considered, and they're listed in the report in some detail. The detail is there because it's quite difficult to get the narrative in an easily digestible way about those different governance models. The report suggests that we are not going to progress some of those options at this stage, and the reasons are set out for that. And that will leave several options to continue to be considered over phase 2 of the work, and those options are that all services are bought in-house, that we retain a mixed model approach, but that would mean on the one hand we could put all of our leisure facilities out to a single contract, but retain active communities and our leisure management functions in-house, and that's primarily because active communities is the outreach work that happens outside of leisure facilities, and it's quite difficult to get a single contractor to deliver those. Or we have a mixed model approach where we retain the same things in-house, but we put some facilities out and retain some in-house dependent on need and areas of deprivation. There is obviously a risk with that we don't have a single consistent service across North Northamptonshire. So there is more work to be undertaken in phase 2. What we're doing at the moment is looking at the visioning. A survey is being pulled together that members will be invited to take part in, so please do. And we will also be surveying our current users of all of our services across the leisure estate and our active community service to look at what sorts of things are important to our members and to our users moving forward. And then when we have that vision, we will be looking at almost like a gold, silver and bronze. So what does what does a basic service look like? What does an enhanced community service look like? Which is probably, well, it is what we're delivering in our in-house services currently. And what's a transformational approach look like? All of those need to be fully costed and risk assessed. So not just about the financial implications against the different models, but also the full cost benefit analysis, HR implications, procurement implications, etc. So there's more to be done in a short period of time, and we're hoping to bring that report forward in due course. So sorry to have rambled on a little bit, but it is quite complicated, so I'm happy to take questions. And my colleague Julie, who is my head of leisure, is in the room as well, in case there's anything too technical for me. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Kerry, and thanks for the report. It was a very interesting read. I'll open up the floor to anyone who's got comments or questions. We'll start with Leon, please.
Thank you. Can we look at the financial sustainability and risk first, if that's okay? The VAT changes that came in last year. Was it last year or 2024? Recently. We also have the Employment Rights Bill due to come in 2027, I believe, and then the always ever-increasing energy costs. Does this take those factors into account, considering it's a long-term plan?
Yes, absolutely. We need, before we can recommend any final model, and that's part of the work that will happen over the coming months, we need to look at all of those. We obviously have had some information already about the implications of VAT changes. And what that's meant in practice is that the council is able to reclaim VAT on most of our leisure offer, whereas external contractors are not able to do that. There is an industry model out there called an agency model, where operators can request the council to take on all the income that comes in and then passport it to the operator so that that relinquishes their VAT responsibilities, but that's quite high risk to the council. So we, in terms of the industry experts we're talking to, but also our finance colleagues, are saying we need to be really cautious. We need to go through all this meticulously and really understand what all the risks, opportunities and dependencies there are around all those different things, VAT, employment rights bills, the different models that are out there. So yes, we don't have all those answers yet, but that's the work that we're doing currently.
Got it. Thanks, Kerry.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Kerry. I'll be brief in relation to this question. It is quite complicated, so thank you for that introduction. But I was just wondering from a procedural perspective in relation to next steps. So looking at section 6, there's a tender exercise to identify a leisure industry expert to undertake the next phase of the work in relation to the 3 options, if those are the 3 options that are going to go ahead. And then 6.2 says, once that work's completed, a further report will be brought before executive for a decision. Does that mean we're not going to get an opportunity to review that report that's going to come out at the next stage, and it's going to go straight to executive without scrutiny from ourselves? Because that's the indication in section 6. Thank you.
That's certainly not the intention, and we would I'd be more than happy to bring the next report to scrutiny before it goes to executive. Absolutely.
Yeah. We want the best for our leisure services, not just the cheapest option on paper. A detailed review has shown that external contractors may appear low cost, but those savings are uncertain, and past performance shows weaker quality, reduced investment and lower customer satisfaction. Our in-house teams have consistently delivered high quality services, award-winning health programs and strong community outcomes. As a scrutiny committee, we're challenging the assumption in this report to ensure any final decision puts residents first, protects public assets and delivers real social value, not just short-term financial gains. Would be my comment.
Absolutely. Not going to hear it. But we need...
It seems the council's incorporating a lot of costs here when you read through the report. There's lots of other, where the contractors aren't liable for certain things and rates are going up and the council's picking it all up. So it don't, for me, when I go out to tenders, when those sort of come back, I'm like, sharpen your pencil and come back and it's, better deal.
I obviously completely agree with everything you've said, and we need to consider all of that in the next report. But we obviously have to, really provide robust information about the financial implications of the different levels of service, bronze, silver and gold, and also the different management models, because we can't ignore the fact that the council will have to consider its financial position when making the decision around the future management option. So it's our job as officers to present all that information in a robust way, because however we deliver those services moving forward, they need to be financially sustainable, whether we're delivering them or whether they're outsourced, because the council has to continue.
But a third party will always be looking to, if they've got their profits and bottom line. We're not necessarily about profits, we're about keeping things, a high quality service, whereas a third party contractor will always put their prices up. We're not necessarily guaranteed to put salaries up because, financially we can't afford it, but people still got jobs. So outsourcing it is not always the most cost effective.
Yeah, I completely noted that's your feeling. We need to map all of that out and look at that in some detail, so that when the decision's finally made, that all of that has been considered in the round. One of the things we've decided to do on the back of the work we've done so far, which is why we're talking about getting some help in to develop that sort of service specification, because we know at the moment we have inconsistencies, because that's what we inherited, and we've had more ability and flexibility to grow and develop our in-house service in line with our strategic priorities, which we've had less ability to do with the current contracts. However, if we develop a single specification that's really clear about, do we want consistent pricing regardless of the model? Do we want consistent concessions for certain cohorts of the population regardless of the model? So do we want a standard? Then we'll have one specification, and whether we deliver it as a council in-house or whether a contractor delivers it, we can say this is what we want you to deliver. I think that the bit that we need to make sure members understand when making the decision is, well, what does that cost? Is it, if it's the same level of service, what's the best financial model to deliver that? And I think whilst traditionally outsourcing was more cost effective, we need to look at, given all the other nuances we've spoken about, what is the most cost effective moving forward. But, it isn't just about cost, as you absolutely say. It is about quality. And for us, it's about sustainability, whatever the model is. Thank you.
No, thank you for that.
Thank you. Hi, Kerry. Thank you for the report, as usual. I'm really pleased to see this come forward. As you know, I've been heavily involved with all of this going forward, and I'm delighted to see it coming in different stages, because we're able to eliminate eliminate some of the issues that we've had previously. We always found over the last 4 years that our in-house active communities team have done an amazing job. I mean, they've worked really hard to try and keep a consistent level of service throughout all of the teams working here. But obviously, the majority of them work here in Corby, and so Corby get that level of service. And what we're looking at now is making sure that the rest of North Northants get those sort of levels of service as well. But also, everybody looks at paying the same thing. If you go to a swimming pool in Kettering, or you go to a swimming pool in Rushden, or wherever you should really be paying the same amount of money. And I think that's part of this plan, is making sure that it's fair across the whole of the district. I'm going to call it. I can never remember what it's called anymore. Making sure that the quality of service is consistent, the costings are consistent, and that of course we have to think about what that cost is to the council. And leisure services are never cheap. I mean, let's not be under any illusion. I mean, you look at a swimming pool, and over the last 4 years, the utility costs have gone literally through the roof. Let's not talk about roofs, but they have gone through the roof. And of course, previous to that, there were some of the contracts that had a facility within them, that they would actually pay the council money back for running a service when they were provided externally. But once all the COVID came and the costing started, that wasn't the case anymore. It always ended up that as a council, we had to give money to the leisure providers. So, and they brought in the new utility benchmarking process, which means that if it goes so far above index-linked rates, Kerry knows, the council has to subsidise anyway. So we have to take all of those factors into account when we're looking at how much this service is going to cost, be it internal, external, or a mixture of the two. I think it's really, really useful that we've managed to eliminate some of the process, and now we're going to wheedle it down to what really is the best service that NNC can provide for our residents. And I would really be interested to see the data come back from that, as you know. One of the questions I'd like to ask is sort of what consultation or engagement is planned with the staff and the service users and communities before any final recommendation is presented? And also, how will service continuity and risk management be maintained during any transition to a new model? I think those really are the two key questions that I'd like to ask, but I'm really delighted that this has come forward, and thank you to Julie and the team, because I'd say they do an amazing job. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll pick up on the two issues. So in terms of consultation, the plan is, because we're under quite a time scale to get the second phase done, and that's primarily because we're working back from when we need to mobilise the new model, whatever that decision is, and that's why there's a recommendation also in the report about extending a couple of the contracts to March 28, so that we have a single sort of transition date rather than having several transition dates. But whilst March 2028 feels a long way away, it's actually not, and we know that it will take about 18 months to mobilise whatever decision is made, whether that's all in-house or whether we have to go out to market, because we know how long the procurement process takes. So that's why we're aiming to bring a report back in the late spring. So in terms of consultation, we're sort of minded of what can be achieved. Now, we did a lot of consultation publicly to create the active community strategy. So we've got a lot of that information already about, the barriers to activity, about what encourages people to use facilities and what doesn't. So what we will do between now and the next report coming forward, is a comprehensive survey that we will ask all elected members to fill in, because we want to know what's important to you, whether you're a leisure centre user or not, because we're asking you to sort of think about that individually, but also on behalf of your constituents. And then we will be consulting with all the users, and I mean that in the round, so not just members of leisure facilities, but people that use all of our services across the active community service. We'll cast the net as far and wide, just again to ask what's important to them. I genuinely think we would struggle to get a full-blown public consultation done in that time. So just being honest about that. Then in terms of continuity and transition, yes, we're absolutely mindful that whatever the decision is, we don't want any disruption to service. We've already started to engage with staff in-house so that they're aware this is all happening, and we've met with our current leisure operators, the contractors, and provided information that they can share with their staff as well, because we want to reassure and not alarm staff. We want people to know that we just want it to be business as usual. And then when it comes to a decision, as part of the detailed programme planning we would do for that transition over that 18-month period, whatever the model is going to be, then that business continuity is built into that. There are quite there are a number of mobilisation plans that we can call on, whether we are transitioning a leisure facility from one external operator to another. Within the industry, there's lots of experience about how that is done. But equally, if we are bringing all or more facilities in-house, we will have a plan for that. We're talking to areas that have done that recently elsewhere in the country. not to learn how to do it, because I think we know how to do it, but actually to learn the pitfalls and things to avoid. But, you know, again, that once we've got the decision, we'll be able to plan for that transition carefully. Thank you.
So thank you for that, Kerry. I appreciate the timescales are really tight. It always was. And so, yeah, I mean, as much consultation as possible would be really useful. One of the things, obviously, I'm well aware of the active community strategy and some of the suggestions and funding issues that we may encounter further down the line when we're looking at investment in new or upgrading facilities and such. And obviously, that really has to be taken into account when we look at the model that we're going to choose to go forward, because there are facilities out there that do need some serious funding, as we know. And so what assurances have we got really that will be built into the modelling, please? Thank you.
So I think the report references the fact that you can't really separate the future management model with facilities in terms of investment strategy, and that doesn't necessarily mean there has to be council money. We're very good as a service at attracting external funding into our leisure facilities. So in 2024 to 5, we delivered about 25 leisure capital projects worth £5.8 million, and less than £1 million of that came from council funding, because we were able to attract external funding. That's not easy necessarily. It's doable for smaller projects and refurb, but we know that we have some ageing facilities, Kettering swimming pool, Splash in Rushton. We do have some ageing facilities that are giving us cause for concern, but we are pulling together an investment plan that we've started to obviously engage internally with finance colleagues around. Obviously no decisions have been made specifically around that, but in order to inform the future model, we can't ignore the capital investment requirements. So if we were going to put all the facilities out to tender, then those operators that might bid for that contract are going to want to know in detail what the condition of those buildings are. So whilst we have had some condition surveys done, we're now taking that to the next level of detail and doing all the mechanical engineering surveys as well, because, you know, we need to be able to say this is the state, and if, you know, what our plans are to invest or not, or what we would expect an operator to do or not. So all of that has to be factored in. So it's complex. I mean, the other good message is that there is a significant amount of Section 106 for the leisure estate. I think it's over £17 million over the next 10 years. But obviously, that some of that is very defined about where it can go and for what purpose. So you can't just say, oh, that's great, we can use that to build a new pool over here. It doesn't work like that. But so we're having to factor all that in, because we don't want to lose 106 and we want to use it appropriately within the time frame. So all of that has been factored into the investment plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll come across to Brendan in a second. I just wanted to clarify on one point. In the report, you're recommending that we extend the current contracts with Future Leisure and, I can't remember the other one, to align them to March 2028. Makes sense so that we're all on one kilter. But I'm just going to presume here, have they already got extension capability available, or are they acceptable? Because for one of them, it's just going to be a short extension of about 6 months, is it? Is that something they're actually willing to do on the short term?
So we've started to engage with them around that. Obviously, I can't give you the definitive answer about whether they will or they won't, but we're starting to engage with them. They understand the work that we're going through. We've not had any indications that we're going to be, you know, face any challenges around that. Obviously, you know, we need to fund that, so we need to pay for any extension. So we need to do some work, and we're obviously working with our procurement colleagues to understand all the implications of that. But it feels the right thing to do, to give us the time to make sure the decision's made appropriately, and then we've got our mobilisation plan for whatever model it will be moving forward. And
finally, linked into that then, is there a backup plan? In terms of, we're planning at the moment for this 18-month window to change things from March 2028. what if they don't agree to short-term contract extensions? What if they want longer? Are we in a position to be able to bring this forward to when their contracts currently expire? Is there a get-out clause on the contracts that say we've got to give them notification by a set period of time? And is that all being taken into account at the moment?
Yeah, I think it depends on each of the contracts are set up slightly differently. We are thinking about what our backup plan is should we not be able to extend those contracts. I don't think we're likely to be in that position, but I think it depends on the decision that we get as to the future management model. I think we will know. We continue to have those conversations working with procurement, but we will know. It will be easier for them to make a decision and for us to know which way that's likely to go once we know what the future model is. Thank you.
Thanks for that. We'll come over to Brendan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Kerry. Very good report. Certainly something we should get behind. I think leisure facilities and provision tends to take a back step when it comes to council. We want to make our facilities go for as long as possible. Just a couple of areas, if I can. It seems in the recommendations that we're going down the route of preference for a single contractor external with a mixed model but single contractor. Obviously, as a finance person, the inherent risk that I see in there is we're then beholden to the financial pressures and risks of that single external party. Natural question would be, is it not then better to continue with a mixed model approach but with multiple contracts? And then secondly, sections 518, 519, they talk about the underperformance and staff retention issues at some of these external contractors, which we appreciate can happen anywhere. And in particular, 5.27, it highlights the probable higher cost to them from the planned, it was mentioned before, Employment Rights Bill, specifically to do with any employees for private sector that are connected to an outsourced contract from the public sector. Those staff then, they get to have, as close as possible, terms and conditions that are comparable to that public sector entity. So on that, and related to the previous, for me, that only enhances the risk of using a single contractor. So maybe, my question would be, and I look forward to the CBAs around these, especially around, I understand why we're looking to or prefer to have a single source external contractor, but why are we preferring that to remaining as, tendering out to multiple contractors? Thanks, Chair.
Thanks for that. It's a really good question. Obviously, working with industry experts and talking to other authorities and looking at that single service specification and a consistent approach, and also the cost to the council, normally going out for a single contractor rather than having a mixed model would be better value for money. But no decision obviously has been made yet. And what we do need to do, and thank you for your comments around that, is make sure that when we bring the second report forward that we can articulate the risks, if there are any, around that, so that members can make an informed decision. The market is relatively volatile. There is lots of, I could say that about lots of markets at the moment, can't we? So there is, it's competitive. We know from previous other authorities that have recently gone out to tender that there's lots of leisure contracts that are still out to tender nationally, so there's contracts going out, but the number of bidders bidding in for them is quite limited and quite small, and so those bidders are looking for the best financial deal for them as private businesses, even if they have a charitable arm, and so we have to be attuned to what the market looks like at the time. If the decision is to go out, that doesn't mean to say that should be a reason not to go out to market, but we just have to be attuned to that market volatility, and we have to think about the risks of a single contract versus a multi-contract arrangement at that time. we are being advised by industry experts that it's the preferred route because it is simpler, it's cleaner, it's probably in terms of the external route, it's a more cost effective for the council to have one contract than have several. But we do need to be attuned to all the risks around that. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go over to Leon, please. We'll come to David then, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on a couple of points, just going back to the discussions in relation to costs, I think, to be fair, reading Table 8 and the evaluation criteria and weightings that the consultants applied, they did give the greatest overall weighting to revenue implications, and that's not just the ability to maximise revenue, but also the ability to effectively manage expenditure and costs. So I think that's quite important. I'm glad to see that. And that in part picks up on the point that Councillor Davis mentioned. But staying with the same evaluation criteria and weightings, if they are going to be applied by the consultant in the next phase in relation to the options they'll be looking at, if that's the agreement, then under criteria 1 and delivery of strategic outcomes, I would like to see some information there as to how each of those three options would be best placed to work with existing private sports clubs and schools, because both of those are the bedrock of getting youngsters in particular into physical activity and sports. So I think if that could be fitted into the delivery of strategic outcomes as a measure for each of those three options to look at, and how each of them would be best placed to partner with private sports clubs and schools, I think that would be super important. And just a second point, I noticed the red risk areas in Table 6 on page 13 of the report, and I don't have an issue in relation to how they've been categorised. And I think you did mention this, Kerry, earlier, so it's just a clarification. Are you looking at how the other councils that are mentioned in the report have been managing those risks in relation to the options that they've taken? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So in terms of the evaluation criteria, I suppose we haven't quite got that far in terms of how we will assess the remaining models, but they will need to be evaluated against some criteria, and strategic objectives are obviously important, and it probably would make sense to use the same criteria headings that we've used in the first piece of work. In terms of adding in that connectivity to sports clubs and schools and other pipelines and encouragement, because I would include the wider voluntary sector in that as well. Yes, it is part of our strategic outcomes about how we encourage and support people to understand the benefits of physical activity, but also where they can in their community get involved in sport and physical activity. I think because that's not part really of our current contracts, we can build that into the specification moving forward. In terms of our current arrangements, our active communities team, which are in the in-house team but deliver across Northants, we already have a sports club network, and we have through that team manage relationships with a lot of our sports clubs and schools and other providers, but there's more work to be done. So I think it's really important to note that that's something we should be factoring into our future specification. And in terms of talking to other areas, yes, we are. We've been talking to West Northamptonshire because they've recently gone out to tender, so we've been hearing from them about their experience with the market and some of the issues that have been raised already about the market. But we're also talking to other councils that have bought services in-house, and are hoping to sort of do some site visits as well, just to understand the nuances of that. So yeah, we want to benchmark and avoid pitfalls, I think, is the answer to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? No. In that case, then we'll bring this one to a close. So, last chance for anyone, if you've got any additional recommendations or changes, amendments to the report, to raise that now. I'm not seeing anything. Okay. So, on that basis, then, the recommendation from the officers is hang on 2 seconds. Just to make comments on the report, proposed recommendations to the executive set out below, and feedback to the executive, which as a committee then we're happy to that we've done that, we've covered that. So I'm going to propose a 5-minute interval now before we move on to the last item. Thank you very much for your time, Kerry. Again, if you want to go at this time, please feel free. Apologies to Yvonne and Ayaz that we will come to you very shortly, so thanks for your patience. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you very much. So we'll now crack on with the last item tonight, agenda item 6, or penultimate item, the Draft Housing Tenant Engagement and Influence Strategy 2026 to 2029. And if I can invite Lynn Buckingham again to address the committee. And again, Lynn, as you know, you've got 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chair, members, this strategy is necessary, overdue, and directionally sound. It responds directly to the post-April 2024 regulatory regime and the expectations of the regulator of social housing, particularly the transparency, influence and accountability consumer standard. On paper, the intent is solid. The execution risk is where the scrutiny lens belongs. Let's be clear about the context. This is the Council's first ever dedicated tenant engagement strategy. That alone tells us the tenant voice has historically been understructured, not embedded. A 60% tenant satisfaction measure rising to 67% is progress. But in regulatory terms, that's recovery, not excellence. The regulator doesn't reward trajectory, it assesses assurance. There are 3 areas that must be strengthened for this to be genuinely fit for purpose. First, from listening to provable influence. The strategy repeatedly commits to listening, respect and inclusion. Good. But the regulator will ask one question. Where is the audit trail showing tenant input changed decisions? Complaints, learning, service redesign, policy changes, they must be formally tracked, published and closed-looped without a visible, you said, we did, here's the outcome mechanism. This risks being engagement theatre. Second, independence and challenge. Co-production with TPAS and the Tenant Advisory Panel is positive, but the independence must be protected. The regulator expects constructive challenge, not managed consensus. Scrutiny should be clear on how dissenting tenant views are escalated, not filtered. Third, governance teeth, not warm words. Quarterly monitoring by the Housing Improvement and Assurance Board is fine, but where are the trigger points? What happens if tenant satisfaction drops? What happens if engagement commitments aren't met? What are the consequences? Without defined escalation threshold, this is oversight without leverage. Finally, I'm concerned by the statement that there are no direct risks. That is not credible in a post-inspection environment. Weak tenant influence is a regulatory risk, a reputational risk, and ultimately a financial risk. So my ask is simple. Before executive approval, this strategy needs clear outcome metrics tied to the regulatory standards, published evidence of tenant-led change, defined escalation and accountability mechanisms. Do that, and this moves from well-intentioned to inspection resilience. And where is the communication from the council? A few months ago, we put in a new policy, but tenants haven't been informed on that policy. And that is a big risk area. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you for coming down regularly to contribute. It is appreciated. I'll pass over to Yvonne and Ayaz to introduce the report. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the public questions there, which I'll leave to the end. I will lead on this segment today. I'm incredibly proud to bring forward to you a tenant engagement and influence strategy, and I would like to reference the influence item that's been included within this strategy. Just to help you, just some of the historical tracking of this. I think it's unfair to say that there hasn't been tenant engagement historically within the organisation. We have worked very well with residents to deliver a number of outcomes, but we recognise that that needed to be improved. And I think it's important as a local authority and as a housing provider to always be looking ahead and seeing where we can improve and to not stand still. So whilst I do recognise this is the first strategy, I think it's right and appropriate that we have a structure. I remember sitting here many years ago being challenged that we didn't have a housing strategy, and then we delivered a housing strategy. So I think it being the first of one is not necessarily something we should not recognise, but I also think it's important that we do have a strategy because it sets out the framework and our objectives. Having worked with residents, we agreed that we would bring TPAS in, Tenant Participation Advisory Service, who are the sector lead on tenant engagement. There's not many people better out there in terms of having some of this experience. And they came in and they worked with our tenant panel and chairs, a number of members, some independent voluntary organisations to help frame a new framework. And it's that framework that helped us develop the tenant engagement strategy. And I think that shows actually that there is real engagement with our tenants. Our tenant engagement has helped us deliver a new housing strategy. It has improved our website. It has improved handbooks. IAS sits here because our tenant chairs were part of the recruitment panel for one of the most senior officers who would be leading the housing service. So they had direct involvement within that. In terms of the regulatory for social housing, we were also always mindful of compliance with that, with all of these strategies that we develop, and particularly around the tenant engagement one. So I'm very, very pleased that our member of the public was able to, voice that recognition. We have had this strategy tested. We have had a regulatory inspection, and the regulator has had full sight and awareness of this strategy, and it will have tested us against all of the regulatory compliance standards, particularly the transparency one. The strategy was co-produced and presented to our governance, which is the Housing Improvement and Assurance Board, and that presentation and the document and the information around that was also viewed by the regulator. The regulator was present. They weren't present, they observed when we presented the strategy to the Housing Improvement Board. In terms of key metrics, I think it's really important that we put the roadmap down, and that is what this strategy delivers. But we have also, in agreement with the regulator, set a number of key performance indicators that will work alongside this document. They have been agreed with the Tenant Advisory Panel, and they were going to be presented to the Housing Improvement and Assurance Board, which is housing's top level of governance. And unusually, we are one of very few organisations who have our chairs of our tenant panel as full-time contributing members to that housing governance board. So at every level, whether it's coming through the tenant engagement panel, whether it's coming through tenant engagement activities, at the top tier of our governance, we have the tenant chair of the advisory panel, and the scrutiny panel sits on the Housing Improvement and Assurance Board with us. We recognise that it's a very wordy document, and what we will be doing is, whilst a lot of it has to be in there because A, the tenants asked us for it, and B, the regulators require it, we have the ability to change the the layout of the document, because we recognise that actually it's quite late into the document that it does actually get into the meat of the bones of what we're actually going to be doing. So we will be looking at that. Whilst we have the Housing Improvement Assurance Board have approved this, we did want to make sure that it had come to scrutiny to be cited on, and we have also offered an opportunity for further comments and information on there, because we certainly welcome the challenge and the information that's coming to us. In terms of communication, we publish our quarterly performance data for residents on the website. We are providing quarterly updates now. We will be going forward on our KPIs and our performance across all of the regulatory standards, and the regulator is aware that we will be doing that. We produced a mid-year report that provided considerable information around our housing service improvement. We also have the housing strategy on there, and we've also done considerable work in improving the website, all of which has had the support and involvement, I'm really proud to say, of our tenant advisory panel. So we have service standards, we have accessible videos, we have new handbooks, we have a new letting standard, and all policies and procedures and strategies go through the tenant panel. So there is a lot of communication, I think, around what we are doing, and it is going through tenants. This will go through to our executive for final sign-off, but we're not waiting to then. So we have a number of additional policies and groups being formed, and they will be structured around the 4 areas of compliance. So you will start to see, we already have a complaints panel in place, we have a repairs panel in place, we are going to be developing a housing equality, diversity and accessibility group that will look at how we deliver accessible and make sure all of our services are fair across the entire piece. We do get challenge from our Housing Improvement Board. It is not a tick boxing exercise by any means. There is very credible challenge in terms of then a lot of the things that we have changed and delivered have come through the Housing Improvement Board. In fact, they were very instrumental in making sure that we were delivering against our decent homes and our health and safety standards. So I think we are doing more. We were never proud of the 60%. We recognised that 60% was not where we wanted to be. Hence, we involved and created the Housing Improvement Assurance Board. In every single element on the TSMs, we've improved on every single element, and we want to continue that trajectory. And I think most importantly, whilst we talk about regulatory compliance, we have now been inspected, and we await the outcome of the regulatory inspection. I'm not sure that there's kind of any more I can add to that, but certainly it's a document that we should be proud of. I don't think we should be critical of the fact we didn't have one before. I think we certainly did have tenant engagement, but we knew it needed to be strengthened, and we knew that we needed tenants in the voice of developing this. And I think what's really I'm proud of as well is that our tenants, the tenants chair, presented their tenant engagement strategy to the Housing Improvement Board and to the regulators of social housing. I didn't present it, our tenants presented it, because it's a document that they are proud of and they have been involved in creating. So is there more we can do? Oh, absolutely. Is there more we are going to do? Absolutely. And we would welcome comments into this so that we can frame the final document that's going to the executive. As I say, we're not here seeking formal approval of the strategy, but I did want to make sure that as scrutiny, you did have sight of the strategy, you had awareness, and that you also had an opportunity to provide us with your comments and your challenge, because collectively around the table, I know we have one objective, and that is to deliver the best housing service that we can for all of our council tenants. Thank you for your time, Chair.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you very much. And thank you for the report. Very good. I'm supportive of it. The only way you're ever going to improve the housing stock and the housing conditions, living conditions, is by listening to the tenants. They're the ones living in it day in, day out. They're the ones that know what the problems are, and they're the ones that need to get involved. So to have this strategy is really fantastic. I will open it up to the floor for anyone that's got any comments, questions or concerns. Anyone? Okay, David, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to go first again. And thank you, Yvonne and AS, and also Lynn. And thank you for bringing this to us this evening and giving us the opportunity to comment. It's super important. I do tend to agree with Lynn Buckingham that the intention in the report is solid, and that our scrutiny ultimately will be in terms of its execution and implementation. I'm particularly taken with Lynn's point about the importance or need for an audit trail on where tenants' input ultimately results in change, whether that's through the Tenant Engagement Board or otherwise. And if that's something that can be deciphered in the future, whether that's for presentation to executive or presentation to ourselves as a scrutiny committee, I think that would be really important. I'm looking at the 2025 headline tenant satisfaction measure results, and the improvements are super positive. So congratulations to everybody who's been involved in those improvements. I think that's really positive. But as is human nature, I've picked out the two areas that remain below 60%. And I'm wondering if you could give us any indication as to what the reasons are for those two areas remaining below 60%, and also what is being done to rectify them. Some information on that, I think, in relation to what's being done to rectify them is set out in priorities 1 and 4, but nothing in too much detail. And just a second question, if I may, in relation to that tenant satisfaction measures, that's on the back of an annual survey. So will the next annual survey results be presented to us next year as a scrutiny committee as well? Because I think that'd be really important. Thank you.
So we've just commissioned the TSM satisfaction survey for this year going forward. So they are presented to yourselves and to exec and to residents on there. So certainly they will come out every single year for you. The areas that we knew that we still had underperformance was in complaints. So we've made monumental improvements in our complaints delivery. In fact, I think not last month, the month before, we had 100% compliance. But we started from a very low base, and we recognise that. So we have Place Cube in place now. We have a monthly monitoring in terms of complaints data. We are carrying out an internal audit of our complaints processes. I, as chairs, a Housing, Learning and Assurance and Improvement Board, and we now have a complaints panel. So we will be keeping on site on that, and we will be reporting to more granular detail in terms of where the complaints are, any trends, any kind of analysis, and we'll be using that to do more data and more improvements. So, for example, if we have complaints of repairs in a particular area, does that mean we need to shift our repairs model? Is it going to be reforming our development programme? Is it telling us more that we need to do in a particular area? So we've agreed with the regulator that we will be doing more of that granular reporting, and that will be going to the Housing Improvement Board on a monthly basis, but we've also agreed to do a housing quarterly report that will go out to members, the executive, the public and also the regulator. So you will be able to see that improvement going forward on there. So we will do that. Absolutely, in terms of the deliverables, the Housing Assurance Board will be receiving all of this granular data, and I mentioned the KPIs that are going towards them that it would be approving, and we've agreed with those with the regulator. So you will start to see more detail coming through and challenging that. And as I say, the Housing Improvement Board, it has teeth. It challenged us and it says, well, why are you not at this amount at stock condition services? Why haven't you not done that? And it's been a real driver. And having two of our tenants on there keeps us accountable. You know, it makes sure that that tenant voice and that tenant oversight is always within there. So you will start to see more of the delivery and the metrics as we work through the programme with our members in April.
Thank you, Yvonne. Excuse me again. Yeah, thank you for the report. Obviously, there's a lot of information in here, and by the sounds of it, obviously, it'll be great to have some further information come forward. Two things, really. This is a very lovely, glossy report here with, and maybe I'm being a bit critical, but obviously there's stock photos in here. If we're proud of our housing stock, why are we not showing what our housing stock is and having proper pictures of what we actually do? I think surely that would be really nice to be able to show what we do and what we've got here rather than using stock photos. It just dawned on me while I was looking through it, and I just thought, well, I could get those off the internet myself if I wanted to. But it would be really lovely that our residents see how proud we are of our stock and that we're able to use real-life pictures and real-life people in our reports. I think just that's one point. And my second point is, or question really, are sufficient staffing and financial resources in place to deliver on the strategy's commitments over the 3-year period? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it is a professional mocked-up document. We do have to get permission from our residents if we are going to use certain images. But actually, across a number of other documents, we have proudly presented our stock. So you will see in the mid-year report and the housing strategy, the predominance of those properties within those images are our own. And that's been a really decided and decision from myself that I want to do that. As we evolve, because this is our very first strategy, as we get consent from more residents, we will start to be using our own pictures and imagery in terms of our residents. So this was, I think, reference to showing what it indicates, and then as we move forward through that, it will happen. But I do have to have permission from any resident of any information and imagery that we use, but we already use our own stock in the mid-year report, annual reports, and all of the documents. In terms of do we have the budget? Absolutely yes. And actually what I would like to advise is that one of the biggest elements of tenant influence was the housing restructure. Residents told us what they felt was working, what wasn't working, what they would like to see, the services they would like to deliver in the way they wanted them to be delivered. And we have therefore shaped the new housing delivery model and the housing restructure based on that, and that is fully funded through the HRA. We have also increased the capacity of our tenant engagement officer. We had one officer doing it. We are about to go out to interview for the second, and we have also developed a service improvement team which will centralise tenant engagement in one central team, because we are very, very clear tenant engagement is not the responsibility of only the staff that work within the tenant engagement service. It's for every single officer of this council and the housing service. So having that central team who's been able to drive that improvement will come through. So yeah, I accept the challenge that these are stock photos. I'm not going to apologise for having a glossy, professional, informed document, because that's where we should be. And over time, as we get permission to provide more personal imagery, we will do so. But the stock condition properties that you tend to see on the properties on there are already our own stock, and I'm proud that we've been able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Hey, everyone. Yeah, thank you for this excellent report. Glossy as it is. I completely agree with the basic tenets, excuse the pun, of what we're trying to achieve in here. It's certainly where the council should be. I agree, and you touched on it there. As a corporate parent, it's where all of us should be focusing. It isn't just part of that department. And it's, any growth of any department of any company, the best way of knowing how good you are or how you are growing, you hope it's good, is by getting the end user to give their feedback. So it's good that we now have a tool that the tenants can use. I just maybe a couple of questions on that feedback. Whilst it's good to have percentages in here, percentages, sorry. Whilst it's good to have percentages, it probably would also be useful for me anyway to have the number of respondents, because we know we've got however many hundred thousands of tenants. Having an idea of what does that 67% equate to, because as let's say a viewer of these numbers, are we getting the level of engagement that we need to push those numbers up, or is that number subdued? So is 67% low simply because most of the people that responded were those that had a grievance to respond anyway? So maybe we're missing out on putting it to 75%, because if I'm happy in my tenancy, I just don't respond. I'm happy. That's the first point. And then, secondly, if we don't already, are we looking to get a core group of, let's say, respondents, a bit like the larger, I'm trying to think of the main one. No, it's gone. So having a core group of respondents so that we can keep a track of them in particular, because they may be, let's say, disgruntled this year. They may have put 50% happy for this year, but 75% next year. So then we have a core unit of, that we know. That's where we're focusing. We're obviously focusing everywhere, but that core unit we can see our ups and downs within there. We can give them a bit more gravitas for the scoring, because we know that they always respond. They will always be honest, if you will. Thanks.
Thank you. So the methodology of how we do the survey is often prescribed to make sure that it's consistent across all of the organisations across the sector. When we did the first TSM survey, we put some additional questions in, and we had additional 600 people, I think, contacted us to say that they wanted to be engaged with us more in some other way. And the tenant engagement officers reached out to all of them to say, well, what does that look like? So whilst some people will engage via the survey, you will find other people engage with us through walkabouts. Excuse me, they will engage with us through panels, or even the information we get through complaints and compliments. So there's lots of different ways in terms that we will engage through there. We don't have the granular data of which individual percentage from which area in terms of makes up that 67%. Actually, we do have that. It comes through our acuity report, so we can get some idea of where there are sort of trends and analysis. Separate to this, just to help you as well, we are completing a resident profiling survey as well, which will run alongside this, because one of the really important things is we need to understand better who our tenants are and what their needs are, their aspirations, and anything ideas that we have. So we have a tenant audit programme going, and we've also independently asked QET to do a profiling survey for us. And that will help us not only adjust our services. So, for example, if we find that our large number of residents within our properties indicate they have a particular issue, that helps us frame our aids and adaptations process, for example. So we're using all of that data to make those informed choices, and data will start becoming more key to how we're driving those services. We know that other organisations as well as the annual TSM survey do it quarterly, and we're getting some guidance of whether that's where we'd want to go, because obviously if you do it annually, you've got a historical look back, haven't you? If we start to move into that quarterly cycle of data, you're catching positive, negative, or learning all in a much shorter window, and it helps us improve the journey going forward. So we are looking at whether we can do those things as well going forward.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point, because then we get into a position where we can have a rolling annual performance review as opposed to an annual performance review. So yeah, I completely agree with that. Thank you.
Not a question, just a comment. 7% increase kind of betrays the underlying data underneath it. We've got some areas in there that are increased by 29%, 21%, 15%, 17%. These are absolutely fantastic numbers. And with all the changes that you're making, I'm hoping to see some 80% in there next time. Just want to commend all the work that's gone into this and everybody involved. Really, really positive numbers. Hoping to see it go from strength to strength to strength.
Thank you, Chair. And I would just like to add, if possible, whilst we know that we are regulatory inspected and we are awaiting our outcome, I think it's really important to say that we don't do this work to be regulatory inspected. We do this work to improve the service that we are giving to our residents. And the regulatory inspection is an element of that improved journey. We have improved considerably since vesting day, and that's to, members, residents, tenants and staff, all who came to the table and helped us improve that journey. And I'm really excited to be the Assistant Director who is going to be continuing to lead that journey as we go forward. And I think we needed this structure within this document. And yes, it is our first, but everybody starts somewhere. And I think it's a strong start for us. And I hope it will continue to help us improve in terms of the areas that Councillor Gibbs has mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question and then just a statement. Questions in relation to Section 16 and greater opportunities to get involved. I didn't see any specific reference throughout to elderly tenants, and I'm wondering whether this is something that's going to come out of the work you've just mentioned in relation to tenant auditing and understanding who your tenants are, but whether you have experienced difficulties in elderly tenants wanting to be involved or reaching out to them, how you keep them informed, their ability to share their voice and their willingness to contribute their experience, and also your ability to reach out to them so that they can contribute their experience, and whether that is something that actually could specifically be included as a dedicated category, because I think, or I'm assuming, that there will be particular aspects of that category of tenants that you won't find with others. Just a statement, if I could refer the committee to section 5.8.1, and I'm really glad in relation to climate change that you've reversed executive's decision and we're now back at net zero 2030, so thank you for that.
That decision, so I will check, sir. But certainly in terms of the acuity work that we are doing, we broadened the question. So we do have a sheltered housing forum, but all of our older residents are within sheltered housing. So the acuity is targeting age, race, demographic. We're also asking about mental health, aids and adaptations, and wider, we asked about the household, not just the tenant. And we also asked about ability to use data and how would you want to be involved and how is the best way we can communicate. So that's all there. Once we've got the acuity report, we will be able to map that and start to reach out. But importantly, we want to know our youth as well, because we have young people as well as our ageing people and older residents. The data that we did find from some of the acuity was interesting, that we found that I think over 80% communicated us within an electronic form, but actually that still means 20% don't. So there's a wider parameter, but absolutely. And as I am myself reaching the age of where I am going to be eligible for sheltered housing, it is a personal focus for me as well, Councillor Baker.
Yeah, sorry, Yvonne. I just want to go back to what Councillor Baker was just saying about the climate change part. Is that a clerical error, or is that the actual plan 2030 when we've already voted on it to be 2050?
No, I believe I put that in as an error. I have not reversed a corporate decision. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. As long as no one's got any amendments to make to the report or additional comments to make, so in that case, I'll thank members and officers for contribution during the debate. I can confirm that members of the Place and Environment Scrutiny Committee have noted and considered the contents of the report and relevant appendices, and have raised comments for feedback as well as any concerns to officers as part of the scrutiny procedure. So we shall now move forward with the agenda. Thank you very much for your time, both of you. We've only got one more thing to cover tonight, and that's the Place Environment Scrutiny Committee work programme. Just asking members to note the attached work programme for the committee, and a reminder to everyone for expressions of interest is still open for the involvement with the Carbon Management Task and Finish Group. The members should submit expressions of interest to the Democratic Services. Hand up. Okay, David.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a question on the work programme, simply because if you look at the very bottom of the work programme, it makes reference to Northampton's car parking strategy. And then in relation to meeting date, it says May/June, but that car parking strategy, in accordance with the existing forward plan of NNC, is due to be considered by Executive in March. So there's something that's not quite aligned in that regard, and perhaps we could have some information on that in due course, if not this evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Callum, you can, yeah, we'll take that back. Perfect. Thank you. Helen?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, also, I think I mentioned this last time, the LVEP, we're supposed to be reviewing the LVEP governance, and that was going to be added to the work programme. So thank you, Callum. Thank you.
You mentioned the working group. I just wondered how many people are on it, how many people you need. Just wondered what the numbers are.
It's just expressions of interest are still open for that at the moment. There is no limit, and obviously it's a cross-party working group, so it's up to members if they wish to put in an expression of interest on that one.
That sounds like we're about done then. So thank everyone for your time tonight, and I shall bring the meeting to a close at 20:51. Thank you very much, everyone.